Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV WORLD. In today's show, we will be talking about two important stories. The first is with reference to the political situation in Pakistan that has been quite uncertain since the ouster of the former Prime Minister back in March this year. We also know that the alleged conspiracy that has been talked about from the PTI leadership and the former Prime Minister as well has been something that has been repeated again and again by PTI. And we have also seen that there have been many claims that have been made that, of course, have been denied by the institutions and the incumbent government as well as external forces. However, this claim continues to be made. We also know that Shehbaz Gill, who's PTI chairman's chief of staff, he talked about how the particular cipher that formed the basis of this argument was not shared by the Foreign Office with the Foreign Minister and the then Prime Minister Imran Khan as well, and instead was kept in powerful quarters, what they call powerful quarters. When we talk about the particular conspiracy and what the accusation has been in this regard, there have been National Security Committee meetings twice on this, once when the former Prime Minister was in power and once after that as well, and both times it was reiterated that there was no evidence of any conspiracy. However, of course, the statements continued to be made, and now the Foreign Office is also being put under question, which the Foreign Office spokesperson has clarified and made statements regarding how the due protocols were actually followed, and that the Foreign Office, of course, is professional in its capacity and continues to act with diligence. So we're going to be trying and taking a look at all of this and exploring the kind of political claims that made and whether or not the institutions of the country need to be dragged into this, and when it does, what really happens in terms of the political impact, and then of course how this is then viewed internationally as well, and what needs to be done about this. So that's going to be our first segment of the show today. Our next segment is going to take a look at the situation which is affecting all of us and is quite urgent in its matter. However, the kind of responses that we have seen from the world do not share the same approach, and it doesn't seem like people understand the urgency of the matter with regards to global warming and climate change, which has continued to affect various parts of the world. There have been, of course, unprecedented changes in weather and climate in different regions. There has been increase in forecasts and high temperatures, and of course weather events such as earthquakes, such as fires and hurricanes, all of which of course are a consequence of global warming and climate change. And just recently, of course, the temperatures and heat wave in Europe and the fires blazing across Europe point towards the same fact. We also know that the forecasts that have been made back in 2020 by the Met Office in Britain talked about such temperatures to be there in 2050, and yet we are here in 2022 and the same temperatures have already hit across most of Europe. So we're going to be talking about all of that and what needs to be done about it, because of course at the end of the day we haven't really seen the kind of climate change financing that is required from the developed world, which of course is a major contributor of the increase in global warming. So that is going to be discussed at the end of the show today. For this and more, as always, I've been joined in the studios by Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal. And for our first segment of the show today, we have been joined by Dr. Jameel Khan, who's a former ambassador. Thank you very much, Dr. Jameel, for being with us. And we will soon be joined by our second guest as well. Dr. Jameel, I'll start with you. When we talk about, of course, the Foreign Office, it is an institution that is held in high esteem, and of course a very important post where the diplomatic and foreign relations take a hold ground, and of course the bilateral relations with different countries are developed. The Foreign Office, of course, has its own way of doing things. It has its own workings and protocols, and there is a way that the ciphers are treated if they're coming in, especially from important countries as well. When we see what the political parties have talked about, especially BTI's stance with regards to how the cipher wasn't shared with the Foreign Minister, I want to first understand the protocols that are due when such a cipher comes, and how can this claim possibly be made, since of course the Foreign Minister is of course a party to whatever information the Foreign Office receives.
That doesn't stand to logic. Not only I have served the United Nations as country head in various countries. We used to send cable to the United Nations headquarters, and that had a very stringent and very technical protocol that it could not be stopped anywhere. While I was ambassador of Pakistan, 3 countries, we've been sending innumerable telegrams, what you call cable also, or cipher. So the protocol of that is the moment it lands through a specified mechanism, safe and secure mechanism, never ever broken by any external or internal entity. And once it lands here in the Foreign Office, there's a complete mechanism and machine to decipher it. The moment it deciphers, no other copy can be made, and immediately the distribution is made to the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, the Foreign Secretary, and some more entities of important institutions of our country, marked and unmarked. That is the protocol. And it definitely does not stand to logic that it was not marked to the Prime Minister Secretariat. We have a dedicated additional secretary, grade 21, whose job it is that if it is something important, to even wake up the Prime Minister in the middle of the night and inform him about anything which warrants his attention at that odd hours of the night. So it has this significance and this protocol. Now, if we start making a political mileage out of it, whosoever and whichever regime or government or party are in whatever phase of Pakistan's history, at least not seen it in my service, but whenever it is done, it compromises the integrity of the institution that's a Foreign Office. And that's the last thing which one could afford to do.
Right. Absolutely, of course, that consequences, of course, there. Farrukh, when we take a look at this particular situation, and of course the claims that have been made, as Ambassador Saab was pointing out, of course, it's damaging for the particular institution as well. But when we talk about the accountability of the political parties or their leadership, can even such claims be made which are baseless and don't have any evidence, or without sharing of evidence, a political party can make such a claim? Should that not be something that they're held accountable for, and something that in fact they should be able to explain?
Right, Sana, I will actually request you to allow me to actually treat all of this with broad strokes.
Sure.
Because I want to actually go back to the day when this report first emerged, that something eerie had taken place. Remember, as journalists, we don't have any dog in these fights. We are loyal to the state of Pakistan, and we have to talk about what is there, right? My visceral reaction at that time, remember, PTI was ruling the country. My visceral reaction was that it is going to end many careers, and it is going to destroy morale in institutions, right? This is very important to understand, because politicians do politics, but when it comes to these people who are actually silently doing their job and they are serving the country, it can have really negative consequence for them. Remember that if we talk about hypotheticals, at this moment, we are still awaiting next elections. They can take place in 1 year, they can take place in 6 months, whenever they take place, right? Remember, there will always be a possibility that PTI comes back to power. In that situation, they are going to inherit the entire government machinery. Do you want a Foreign Office which is totally demoralized? Do you want our defense forces? Remember, during PTI's time, our Foreign Office, our defense forces gave you the ace results in everything. May it be attacks from India, may it be Donald Trump's government, may it be the situation that emerged after his removal from power. In that situation, it is important. Now that PTI knows that it has a chance, I think it should stop using the desperate methods which are there that it has been using. And all this talk of conspiracy, with due respect, just to talk about the Foreign Secretary, I have, and by the way, also the former, ambassador to the US. You know how much controversy it generated for them. They were doing their jobs. The Foreign Secretary I've known as an ambassador, and he's brilliant, right? Remember, when it comes to public service officers, we gauge them or their capacity in 2 terms. One, their competence. The second, their overall loyalty to the country. The foreign secretary, before he became foreign secretary, was ambassador to the US, ambassador to India. And remember, there are countries which are your friends, there are countries which are frenemies, but true frontier posting is only India. And you send only people who are the proven competent people and really loyal to the country, because they don't take any pressure from Indian side. So people like that being dragged into all these controversies is obnoxious. And I think that it is about time that PTI realizes that it stands a chance of winning again. And then it will have to inherit all these institutions. They are going to actually work for them.
Absolutely.
Why destroy the morale? You have been complaining for quite some time that for the past 3 years when you were in power, the morale of bureaucracy was bad because of NAB or everything that you kept on saying. Why do you want to increase that problem? It is about time you take note of that.
Yeah,
Right.
Dr. Jamil,
Faisal, let me just welcome in the show Mr. Zulfikar Ali Padar, who has joined us in the debate. He's spokesman to Chairman PPP, Mr. Bilawal Bhutto Zardari. Thank you very much, Mr. Zulfikar, for being a part of the show. Yes, Faisal.
Yeah, Dr. Jamil, Farrukh Pitafi has, rightly pointed out about the morale of the diplomats who are serving, obviously, elsewhere in the world. They are serving the nation. And you being someone who is a seasoned diplomat, who has served Pakistan to his best, you can tell me that, these kind of ciphers, it's a common practice. And they keep on coming to Pakistan, and this is what the diplomats are outside of the country for, because they are supposed to keep the Foreign Office updated on whatever is going on in the relevant country they are serving in. And I just wanted to know, these ciphers, are they just for institutional memory to make the further steps ahead? Number one. And number two, when we talk about morale of the diplomats, when a government does this kind of, takes these kind of steps, can we say that morale of the diplomats, it would go down, number one, and the trust they had built in the relevant countries, it will be affected?
Dr. Saab.
Dr. Jamil.
That's right. In fact, it would definitely, the morale would be impacted and affected. Not only that, the foreign entities, we keep interacting not only with the diplomats there in the respective foreign offices where we are posted, but we also interact with their notables and the politicians and important people. And they, after hearing such things from, or after once they see what is happening around and how we are exploiting this thing for the political gains. In that situation, they would try and refrain sharing things with our ambassadors. And that is going to be detrimental to our entire mechanism of the communication and mechanism of reporting. We write, we give the country report, we give our assessment, even in this telegram, even in this cipher call. The last paragraph, we always give our assessment and recommendation. Reportedly, the recommendation given by the ambassador, Majid, was that he wanted a démarche in a diplomatic manner, through a diplomatic channel. And that was one. And second, he also recommended to just ask the State Department of US that whether it was during the luncheon meeting, whether it was his personal view or it was the stated policy of the United States. So these were the two things, and that's how normally we do. We don't really take it, go to the public and start, mentioning all the contents of the telegram, all the contents of the cipher
right,
message.
Of course. Let me also go to Mr. Zulfikar, Ambassador Saab, and we'll come back to you as well. Mr. Zulfikar, when we, of course, are talking about this particular cipher and the claims that have been made and the kind of impact it will have on the Foreign Office, I want to understand the kind of, or the scale of damage that we're talking about, especially in terms of public perception as well, and then, of course, international perception as well. The talk of this alleged conspiracy has been something that has been part of PTI's political political narrative as well. And it seems that that narrative actually got its way in the provincial assembly in Punjab as well, which means that perhaps a large part of the voters did actually believe in that. Farrukh, I'll come to you if you're shaking your head after that.
Yeah.
But considering what the votes are, if we can make an apparent connection with that, whether or not that's true, we'll come to that later. But when we talk about this particular allegations, they were of course denied by the US, they were denied by the National Security Committee as well. And yet there are statements that are still coming out with regards to what happened with regards to the Foreign Office and how the entire thing was handled. What exactly do you think are the stakes? How badly do you think it has already impacted institutions from the NSC to the Foreign Office? And then when we particularly talked about this particular statement regarding the cipher or the workings within the Foreign Office, has that caused a lasting impact or damage to the way that the Foreign Office is viewed both domestically and abroad?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much for inviting me. I have listened to all the honorable speakers and they have been talking about different perspectives. My personal perspective in this regard is the narrative which have been built by the PTI party and the leader of Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. That narrative is built on the basis of lies, and they have built that narrative so strongly that people started believing in it. And this has caused a huge damage to the entire nation, as the credibility of the Foreign Office and the people working in the Foreign Office was damaged. Because when you damage the credibility of the people working in the Foreign Office, they are demotivated, then they don't want to work for the sake of country's mission. You know, the mission is very important when it comes to the working in the Foreign Office, because you have to look after the interest of the country. And once the judgment of the Supreme Court came like few days back, the whole narrative of PTI's party and the leadership was buried after that, and there was no new story, new narrative they can come up to. Pakistan People's Party and its leadership believes that the consensus should be built, and if there is anything that should be investigated. And after the meeting of National Security Council, I think the whole scenario became very clear, and there was no single question arose after that. And still, the narrative was not limited. Narrative was not limited to the cipher only. Narrative was also a part of the people's demand that the people who have been facing trials, they have been brought into the power. So that was.
All right. We'll come back to you for more details, of course. Farrukh, you were earlier shaking your head with regards to whether or not the narrative actually has been sold, or the people in general believe in this or not. Do you think they don't?
Right. Sana, humble submission. I said it yesterday and day before yesterday as well. I think the common man on the street, given that for past 25 years I've been moving around throughout the country and I've visited the areas where elections were held, I can tell you from my personal knowledge that many of them will not be acquainted with any idea of foreign policy, right? But they are still voting. Why are they voting? It is primarily because of the economic situation that faces them, and they remember one fine morning you wake up and you realize that petroleum prices have jumped 100 rupees. So there is going to be some kind of reaction in that context. And of course, the manner in which PTI was brought down, that also was quite intriguing, because instead of actually sacking the speaker first, that could have actually made the situation better. These people actually went, the current coalition went and removed the chief executive, and that created a prolonged, painful process, right? But I don't think that most of the voters are still voting on alleged conspiracy, because in the past, throughout our history, I have never seen any evidence that religion or for that matter, conspiracy theories have played a massive part in winning elections.
Okay, so you think that the voters have voted for PTI because they are followers of PTI, or because they think PTI can solve their economic problems?
I think that first of all, incumbency factor goes against whosoever is in power. And then the people who were before them in power and who are vocal critics of the status quo, they are going to get rewarded. And this is what has happened. They have played their cards well. They have actually built multiple narratives, one on economy, one on corruption, and of course, one on conspiracy. My point is that the other two planks are so effective, you don't need this, long story or long tail of conspiracy theory anymore.
Yes, Sana, I wanted to add in, I would fully agree with Farrukh when he says that, of course, the inflation has played the key role. And of course, we know that in past, the politics, any notion against America in past, it had sold, a lot, especially
right.
if we talk.
5 of Pakistan's prime ministers came from MMA, then one from Jamaat-e-Islami, one from Maulana Fazl Rahman's party.
Never.
So,
I'm not saying that
Come on.
it brought them so much, effective.
Sir, it
policy.
was always roti, kapda, makan.
Yeah, it was. But all I'm saying is that everything played its role, and this as well, it played its role, especially with the young voters, I must say. But the credit of the whole winning of PTI, all of these 15 seats, it goes to the inflation, the very hard decisions which were very hard to make by the government, the current government. Of course, they made it to settle up the economy, but that went entirely against them. One very important factor I want to mention here, if the people of Pakistan, they were enlightened enough about this cipher and what impact it can have on Pakistan's foreign policies, what impact it can create on Pakistan's foreign office and its bilateral relations with the other world, even they would not be voting for PTI, because even they would understand that it can alienate Pakistan.
All right. Let me also go back to Ambassador Jamil and talk about, regardless of what the voters are voting for, the PTI still continues to keep this particular conspiracy alive. There have been statements that have been coming in from various political parties, whether it's talk of this or denial of these allegations. When we talk about our foreign relations with different countries, particularly the US as well, do you think that the kind of impact that is being created by this talk of conspiracy is now redundant and it's negligible? There is really no effect of this discussion on the way that our international relations or dynamics are evolving, especially with the US?
Yeah, grave mistake in foreign policy, and repeated and consistent mistakes like the one which we've been making in the public meetings, and the way that our PTI leader has been time and again trying to motivate and trying to project it around the world. So definitely it would take some time. It's not going to any such serious dent in your foreign policy because of such attitude. It takes quite a while to really repair it, because such points are then made as a permanent record, and then that they are cited, that what kind of a nation we are and how do we react to a luncheon meeting and to a statement of an assistant secretary. Assistant secretary is like a director general of the foreign office, not a very senior person. And not even a statement. That was just an opinion. We've been, so many times our ambassadors have been saying, so long as Mr. Modi is the prime minister, there won't be any kind of relation, there can't be any headway to improve the relation with India. And if that effect would tantamount to the interference in another country. But those are the opinion at the luncheon meeting, just to emphasize certain points. Now, by the way, in this luncheon meeting, just last one moment only. So in this particular meeting, the ambassador was really so wise that he had taken the military attaché with him. and military attaché had also taken notes. I would say that that was a very structured kind of a luncheon meeting, but there were personal opinions in it, as it happens in luncheon meetings, and it was not a statement by the Foreign Office. So therefore, if we take it to that height around the world, this particular allegation, then obviously we have damaged our foreign policy. And then where and which part of the world the conspiracy is hatched through the diplomatic channels? There are other means, and there are books available. How the prime agency, the premier agency of the United States have been acting and facilitating or trying to aid to regime change, but never through the diplomatic means. And if we bring diplomacy and if we start denting our diplomatic outreach and our approach and foreign policy, and then we expect that our relation with these countries, particularly United States, should be smoothened within just a few days' time. It would take, I think, quite a while to repair that.
Exactly. Zulfikar Sahab, I wanted to come towards you. We know that when obviously, Foreign Minister Bilawal, he took the office, the Foreign Office obviously was working under him. Suddenly we saw that he tried to mend the broken relation with the Americans, and suddenly of course we saw that there was a call exchange between Foreign Minister of Pakistan and Secretary Blinken as well. Could you please tell me how difficult it was for Foreign Minister of Pakistan to do it, and to get to that point, obviously what did we do?
And also, how much of this talk of conspiracy is factoring in the dynamic with the US? How are you navigating through that, and whether or not it's coming up?
The thing is that US is really not bothered. They have already denied through their spokesman that they are not part of any conspiracy and they have no involvement in changing of any regime in Pakistan. When Mr. Bilawal Bhutto Zardari resumed the office of as a foreign minister, it was very difficult for him to start the talks, and as he went on the United Nations Food Security Conference, so there the meeting was scheduled with the Foreign Secretary of the State of US in New York. There they had to talk on several issues, and there was a big trust deficit between the two countries because the previous government and the minister of the previous government, they were not in communication with that regime which came under the leadership of Mr. Biden. So Mr. Bilawal was kind enough in talking to Mr. Blinken on several topics, on the economic development, on the entrepreneurship, on building relationship, people-to-people contact, and getting help, economic help from US, how can they build the ties with US, and how the bilateral relations which have been damaged in the because of the last regime, they can be built and they can be strengthened in the coming times. And you see, as a result of that, Mr. Blinken will be visiting Pakistan in the next couple of months, and the plan is being made, and the whole exercise is being done, that once he will come down to Pakistan, what relationship, what kind of relationship Pakistan and US going to have, and plus that relationship is not going to damage the Pakistan foreign policy, as after the visit and after the meeting with Mr. Blinken, Mr. Bilawal Bhutto Zardari went to China, Iran, and then he went to Turkey, and by visiting these countries, they have also strengthened the Pakistani foreign relation and people-to-people contact with these countries as well. That was the need of the hour, which was left for the last many years.
Right. Batra Sahab, I'm glad that you actually brought up the issue of rebuttals coming from Washington, D.C. as well. There seems to be need for an upgrade in the relationship between the countries in a very particular aspect as well. Regarding transparency of communication as well. If you remember, last time your party was in power, there was incident of Raymond Davis. At that time, the US government, the current political party which was ruling there, actually called Raymond Davis a diplomat. Later on, his own book and other details actually rebutted that impression. So perhaps because of history also, it becomes problematic that people don't trust that much what is coming from Washington, especially in Pakistan. And maybe in coming days, more transparency and honesty will help a lot. Perhaps we should rather rely on our institutions for such rebuttals, because when they are saying, they are speaking to their own people. But that's up.
You see, when once I had the pleasure of visiting US back in 2008 to observe the American presidential elections, I went to the State Department, I went to the many think tanks and the Capitol Hill, and I had the pleasure of meeting with American senators and congressmen. And when I got back, and one of the senior Pakistani officials asked me, so what do you think? What are the what is your observation after visiting US? My simple concluding statement was that we have to put our house in order. We have to strengthen our institutions in order to overcome the trust deficit between Pakistan and US. So what I personally feel that we have to work really hard for putting our house in order. Once our house will be in order, we will be able to for a better dialogue, for better negotiation, for better, strong nerves in dealing with different sectors and dealing with different people on different topics. That will be the strength of, and that can only come once our house is in order. So US and Pakistan, they have a very long relation, and that relation has to be strengthened in the coming future as well. Though we have a trust deficit as well, and the trust deficit cannot be covered in like a few months or so, but that has to be covered with the actions taken from both the sides, and that is very important because the assumptions,
of course.
and the
I'll go to Ambassador
perceptions
Jamil
cannot
Saab.
cover that.
Right, of course,
Yes.
the actions from both sides is required. Jamil Saab, when we talk about the particular cipher and then the kind of conspiracies or the kind of talks that followed that, there was, of course, a damaging impact not just on the institutions, but of course on the particular ambassador as well. And of course, such sharing of documents was quite routine, as was discussed earlier, and is part of how the communication channel actually works in the Foreign Office as well. Do you think that the kind of political narratives that have begun since then will set some sort of a precedent for future ciphers to be used in such a similar manner as well, and whether or not it would also have an impact on the way that the different ambassadors and diplomats will be sharing concerning communication, or whether or not that actually comes out towards public if it is a matter of national concern?
Communication and their own opinion as well, by the way, as you pointed out.
Well, their opinion, their assessment, and their recommendation. Now you will not find it as strong. Now we have been very straightforward in giving our recommendation and assessments, all the ambassadors basically. But now, to my understanding, and I've spoken some of them, they had the reservation. If they write something and if it is exploited the way, or if it is made public. By the way, there are two very technical points I thought to bring it out and for your viewers. Sure. One is that such allegations are very serious. In this case, no one less than the chief executive of a country, right? And the allegation, it attracts United Nations Charter, and United Nations Charter Article 2 is very, very clear. You can't really interfere in any country's sovereignty, right, and integrity. And if you do so that attracts the General Assembly's cognizance and Security Council's cognizance. Likewise, if the United States or any other country, for example, if we take this allegation which has been mentioned by no one less than the chief executive of the country, our country, then in that case, the United States could be brought to books through the international law, So these are very serious allegations, and it has very serious repercussions. And that is where we have to be very cognizant. And your answer to your question, Sarah, that
Exactly.
that our ambassadors and our envoys would definitely be quite cautious now, and to be that our interlocutor and our the foreign offices of the respective countries, the host countries, plus the other entities with whom we interact there, they would also be reluctant in sharing, during the
Right,
luncheon
absolutely.
meetings.
And that is really important. Unfortunately, Faisal, we're really out of time
Just the
for
last
this
one.
segment.
Just
So
the
we'll
last.
have to move on to our next guest as well in the next segment. Thank you very much, Ambassador Jamil and Mr. Zulfikar Badr, for being with us and being a part of the debate. We'll have to move on to our next segment as well. And don't put your head down, Faisal. There's only 10 minutes left. I'm sure the clock is right in front of you and you can see that.
I just want one-liner.
That's fine. If you want to give a comment quickly, that'll
Yeah.
be okay, but we don't have time for questions. Yes.
Yeah, one-liner, Sana, one-liner is, to me, I think PTI as a party, if it ever wanted to criticize a party, another party, that could have been foreign policy of the Democrats rather than criticizing US as a whole state. Because when you start criticizing a whole state, a country, it never goes in your favor.
And it obviously is difficult to re-establish ties as well. We've been joined by our next guest for a segment regarding climate change and, of course, the heat wave that has engulfed major parts of Europe. Mr. Ahmed Rafi Alam, who's an environment lawyer, has joined us in the debate. Thank you very much, Mr. Alam. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Right, so when we talk about, of course, climate change, issues of global warming, we haven't really, of course, had the kind of a talk or urgency or action that is needed. There have been various fora that discuss these issues multiple times, that the seriousness of the matter is communicated, yet the kind of action that is needed, especially in terms of financing for such changes, is not there, and particularly from the developed world as well. And we'll come to all of that needs to be done in this regard. But there have been, of course, many reports that talk about how unprecedented it is, what is going on in Europe right now, and the kind of temperatures that exist there, and the fact that such temperatures are going to be increasingly more intense and more frequent as well. What exactly do you think the kind of temperatures that we see in Europe entail in terms of the action that is required both at home, and then, of course, when we talk about an overall change from the global community as well, how soon do you think such changes need to be made?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me on. And I just want to begin by saying that a lot of people, when we talk about the climate crisis, seem not to understand how bad things are or how bad things have been allowed to come. We are right now in 2022 about 1.1 to 1.2 degrees Celsius warmer than we were at the time before the pre-industrial revolution. And at this 1.1, 1.2 degrees, we are seeing unprecedented heat waves throughout the world. Europe today, but in March, South Asia was subject to the hottest March and April in recorded history. And this is only the coolest summer for the rest of our lives. Scientists have repeatedly warned us that the greenhouse gases that cause the climate change and global warming, there are enough greenhouse gases in the atmosphere today to ensure that temperatures rise to about 1.5 degrees by 2030. That's less than a decade away. There is nothing more than unimaginable destruction to global food systems and perhaps civilization unless drastic and unprecedented action isn't taken to undo the systems that drive the climate crisis.
Right.
Ahmed Rafi, I wanted to come towards you regarding, we know that European countries and the developed world, they are using technology to counter it. But when it comes to the rest of the world, of course, they need help when it comes to tech sharing from the Western side, from the developed world. I'm talking about the hybrid vehicles and hybrid sources of energy, so that less carbon emissions are given to the environment. When we talk about world, I mean, every country shares the responsibility. When we talk about sharing the responsibility, isn't it responsibility of the modern world, of the developed world, to share the tech to fight against environmental changes, share it with the underdeveloped world, and don't make it so dearly that the poor countries can't afford it.
But the UK didn't seem to be, or Europe in fact didn't seem to be very well prepared for what it has seen in the recent days. I'm not sure how exactly tech has helped.
Well, climate change does mean us unprecedented and unexpected changes to weather systems, and so what Europe is experiencing is very much the climate crisis. But when it comes to the developed world and its responsibility, I think you used that word, I want to go beyond responsibility. You have to understand that the OECD countries today produce 80% year-on-year greenhouse gases, and that historically the global north has contributed primarily to greenhouse gases. The heat wave that South Asia experienced earlier this year is on account of colonialism and the wealth accumulated in Western capitals over the last 150 years. This is not financing that is to be shared. These are reparations owed to the damages being caused to the global south on account of the climate crisis.
You've
Right.
beautifully put it.
I'm glad that you actually brought up this dichotomy as well. But at this moment, it seems that global south is as much committed to polluting the environment as global north was. Ahmed Rafe, this is Farrukh Pitafi. Good to see you, my friend, after a long time. Let me ask you about a very, very strange dilemma that Pakistan faces. On one side, Pakistan is nowhere actually maxing its limits on carbon emissions. On the other side, Pakistan is on the list of most vulnerable countries. Pakistan is 8th when it comes to climate change. The question at this moment is how to actually find a solution, particularly for Pakistan, because we are already not emitting as much pollution as was allowed by the law or by the international protocols.
No, I understand, Farrukh Saab, and Assalamu alaikum. It's been a while. I trust you're well. I understand that Pakistan, like many other countries in the global south, are not historical greenhouse gas emitters. And so, therefore, their vulnerability is actually unjust because we're not responsible for this crisis at some level. And that goes back to my point on reparations. But that doesn't absolve states like Pakistan from taking action on the climate crisis themselves. We can't wait for international help when there are things we can do to protect our own people and population right now. And for example, if we don't emit much greenhouse gases, this belies the fact that Pakistani cities are so air polluted that citizens are losing on average 2 to 3 years of their life, and in Lahore as many as 5 to 6. Most air pollution comes from greenhouse gases, and it is imperative on the state to take mitigation actions, not because of the climate crisis, but just because to save the property and lives of citizens, which is the primary responsibility of government. So at this point of the climate crisis, we can sit and talk about responsibilities shared between the global north and the global south. But at this state of the climate crisis, it is imperative on all countries, regardless of their vulnerability, all hands on deck. We must mitigate, we must adapt and prepare for loss and damage.
Right. Rafiza, when we talk about, of course, the action that is needed and the kind of platforms that exist internationally, there have been, of course, repeated discussions in this regard. And I understand when you say that the actions are required from all hands and that everybody needs to play their part. But of course, when we talk about major and immediate change, there is a lot that the developed world needs to do and perhaps needs to do very soon so that we can actually get out of this cycle. How much time exactly do we have before the situation gets worse enough that we are not able to reverse the kind of damage that's done? And then also, what exactly do you think is the most feasible platform for this discussion or for this action to actually even begin with? Because there are many, and when we talk about global financing with regards to climate change, we really haven't seen a proper way or proper action plan moving forward.
Well, I'm sure you've heard these figures of 1.5 degrees of warming and 2 degrees of warming. These are limits set by international agreements. 2 degrees of warming was the Kyoto Protocol in 1996, which was setting the overall amount the international community was willing greenhouse gases to emit, no more than 2 degrees of temperature rise. But we made that more ambitious with 1.5 in 2016 with the Paris Agreement. But you have to understand, these aren't abstract numbers and figures. There is no safe amount of climate change. The difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees of global warming because of greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution is estimated to be somewhere in the region of 150 million people. 150 million people is 4 times the number of people who died in World War I and World War II put together. And currently, scientists are estimating that we will go from 1.1 degrees centigrade today to 1.5 degrees by the end of this decade. You have to understand that these 1.5 and 2 degrees thresholds are the most this is the most international leaders are willing to allow politically allow carnage internationally. It's the most amount of damage they're willing to bear for the deaths that are going to be caused by climate change. As far as time is concerned, there is no safe amount of climate change. We need to stop greenhouse gases now. And Pakistan included must stop its investments in fossil fuel energy. It must apply in renewable energies. It must apply in electric vehicles. It has to improve the quality of life of its citizens and its air pollution. It must do this here and internationally. As far as platforms are concerned, Pakistan's diplomacy should be leveraging the global South's voice so that the global North can pay the reparations due to us for the damage that's being caused.
Ahmed Rafi, if we talk about industrial waste, of course countries, they need to run their economies as well. But can we say that the world needs to learn from China, because China is the biggest producer when it comes to industries?
Yes,
they
there
are the
many
biggest
lessons to be
producer,
learned from the
and they
Chinese
are doing a
economy.
lot.
There's many lessons, and one main lesson I'd like to say that, you see, there are several generations of environmental law. The first generation of environmental law is you shut down all industry that pollutes. But that's counterproductive because you wind up harming industry. In China in the 1980s, they realized that the production of their GDP was far more inefficient than OECD or developed countries. And so China introduced a Circular Economy Act requiring all industries to reuse, recycle, or reduce the amount of resources that they were using. They brought about not just a second but a third generation of environmental law where sustainability and economic development are hand in hand. You see, a lot of people in Pakistan think that development and environmental goals are opposite sides of a spectrum, that somehow you go through a certain amount of development and then you can indulge yourself with a bit of environmental protection. But the reality is you can't have development without environmental protection and sustainability.
Right. Rafi, just a very quick question at the end. You talked about how Pakistan needs to do and invest more in perhaps renewable energy sources and, of course, and also leverage its position. But, of course, there are many variables always involved in the situation, and there are economic concerns. And currently, of course, Pakistan is facing huge economic problems. Can we really afford to do that at the moment?
Well, the Stone Age didn't come to an end because we ran out of stones. If you go to the NEPRA website, you'll read that renewable energies, which are solar and wind, are cheaper than all other type of energies in Pakistan produced today. That includes coal and hydel. So we've known for years that renewable energies are environmentally friendly, but now they're financially sustainable as well. And so I really don't understand why we continue to commit ourselves to long-term fossil fuel
great.
agreements.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being a part of the show, Mr. Ahmed Rafi.
Thank you, Ji.
Joining us for the debate. Thank you very much. Yes, Farrukh, your micro comment, and it has to be micro.
Right. I just wanted to point out policies, of course, up to the government. But the fact that the previous government and the current government have attached a lot of importance to this ministry, particularly until the previous government had Amin Aslam as the minister, and now Sherry Rahman is a heavy hitter. And I think that is a win for the climate change cause in Pakistan. I think at this moment we need very solid advocates who are going to actually not only fight climate change within the country through policy, but go abroad and advocate as well. And I think that is a win, huge win for Pakistan, that such a brilliant person is heading the ministry.
Right, and we hope, of course, that we see some change in action as well. That's all from the debate at the moment.